Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 770, and today is March 14th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot of news to get through on today's show. So before I get there, just a few plugs. First of all, it's fundraising time at the Libertarian Institute. Contribute to our 2025 fundraiser and help us continue to produce great content like this show and all the articles I write. Make a donation today while we have matching funds. You can find this show on YouTube, Rumble, Odysee, and just about anywhere you could download audio podcasts. Follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_, and be sure to subscribe to my new show, The Kyle Anzalone Show. It's the first link in the show notes page. Let's get into today's news. Lots of bad news on today's show, starting with this story. Department of Justice deploys anti-Semitism task force to 4 U.S. cities as part of crackdown on pro-Palestinian protests. So, the Department of Justice said Thursday that it recently created a federal task force to combat anti-Semitism that will be headed to 4 U.S. cities as a part of the Trump administration's broad crackdown on college protests critical of Israel. The Department of Justice said the task force, led by attorney Leo Terrell, will be visiting the leadership of New York, Boston, Chicago, and Los Angeles to discuss their response to incidents of anti-Semitism at schools on college campuses in the cities over the past 2 years. While the pro-Palestinian protests that swept college campuses have been labeled anti-Semitic, many Jewish students and organizations have participated. The Department of Justice said Terrell informed city leaders that he was aware of allegations of schools in their respective cities that have failed to protect Jewish students from unlawful discrimination and potential violation of federal law. Attorney General Pam Bondi accused officials of not taking enough action against the protest. She said, "Too many elected officials chose not to stand up to a rising tide of anti-Semitism in our cities and campuses following the horrific events of October 7, 2023. Actions have consequences, and inaction does too." The Department of Justice, along with several other federal agencies, recently announced the cancellation of approximately $400 million in federal grants and contracts to Columbia University over claims of inaction in the face of persistent harassment of Jewish students, even though Columbia has taken a heavy hand against students critical of Israel. The federal agency said the grants were being canceled in light of ongoing investigations under Title IX of the Civil Rights Act, which the agencies are likely enforcing using a definition of anti-Semitism that includes criticism of the State of Israel. Back in 2009, Trump signed an executive order directing all executive departments to consider the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's, the IHRA, definition of anti-Semitism and organization's list of example of contemporary anti-Semitism when enforcing Title IX of the Civil Rights Act. The IHRA's example of contemporary anti-Semitism includes drawing comparisons of contemporary Israel policy to that of Nazis. It also lists double standards to Israel by requiring of it a behavior that is not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation, and denying Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of the State of Israel is a racist endeavor. Civil liberties groups have sounded the alarm over the administration's crackdown on pro-Palestinian protests, including the effort to deport Mohammed Khalil, a green card holder who was arrested by ICE over the weekend for his role in protests at Columbia. Khalil has not been accused of a crime, and the administration is trying to deport him by claiming he has been involved in activities contrary to U.S. foreign policy. Khalil has been accused of being pro-Hamas, a label that the administration hasn't defined and appears to apply to all criticisms of Israel's genocidal war. And there's this really wild interview between the administration's spokesman for the State Department and an NPR reporter who's asking, well, what's the evidence? And they go back and forth, and the State Department is like, have you watched TV? It's self-evident. And that's their evidence. They really can't produce any evidence on this. So the administration does not just wants to target foreigners. As Terrell said, he wants to put Hamas supporters in jail, and that federal hate crime indictments would be coming soon. You see these disorderly demonstrations supporting Hamas and trying to intimidate Jews. We're going to put these people in jail, not for 24 hours, but for years, Terrell told Israeli media last month. And, another reason this is just extra disturbing, of course, is the Republicans who for years were rightfully complaining about democratic intrusions on the First Amendment and free speech are now about to trample all over it. But on this particular issue, they're likely to get a significant amount of Democratic support. I mean, I can't imagine that John Fetterman is going to stand up against any of this. And there's a lot of other senators and congressmen that hold very similar positions to Fetterman, where maybe we don't agree on the Republicans and Trump with much, but we're glad he loves Israel as much as he does. And then I saw an interview with Tommy Tuberville and John Kennedy, both saying that, we need to lock up what they call pro-Hamas, but essentially pro-Palestinian protesters. All right, now moving to Ukraine, where the fighting is not going very well for the Ukrainians. This one was from Dave DeCamp, March 12th, antiwar.com. Russian commander says Ukrainian forces surrounded in Kirk. So Russia's highest-ranking military officer said Wednesday that Ukrainian troops in Russia's Kursk Oblast have been encircled and are now isolated amid reports that Ukrainian forces have begun to evacuate the Russian region. Ukraine launched Western backed invasion of Kursk in August, but after taking some territory, Russian troops gradually began pushing the Ukrainians back. In recent days, Russia has made a major push and is now rapidly gaining back territory in Kursk. The Russian military officer said that in the past 5 days, Russia has taken control of 24 settlements and 259 square kilometers of territory in Kursk. He also claimed that the Ukrainian military had suffered 67,000 casualties in the Russian oblast. According to Reuters, both Ukrainian and Russian military bloggers are reporting that Ukrainian forces are withdrawing from the region. So a Ukrainian military blogger wrote on Telegram, Ukraine's armed forces are leaving Kursk. There will be no Ukrainian soldier there by Friday. A reporter for the Wall Street Journal wrote on X that after 7 months of combat in Kursk, Ukrainian forces are withdrawing from the Russian region of Kursk. Russian gains in Kursk come amid a push from the U.S. to get Russia to agree to a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine. Ukrainian officials have previously said the purpose of the invasion of Kursk, which took forces away from the Eastern Front in Ukraine, was to gain leverage for negotiations. Politico reported back in September of 2024, about a month and a half into the invasion of Kursk, that top Ukrainian military officers urged Ukrainian President Zelensky not to go through with the offensive. One officer objected because the invading brigade would be too exposed inside Russia and would suffer heavy casualties, and it does appear that that has now happened. I'm not surprised that as we have these talks of a ceasefire ongoing, that, both sides, but particularly Russia, the side that has the capability at this point, is pushing forward and is taking some territory. This is what often happens when ceasefires are on the table, that whichever side or both sides will do everything they can to take as much territory as they can. That way, when negotiations are ongoing, they have an upper hand. And so I think Russia doesn't want to be in a position where it seems logical to Trump that they do some land swaps with Ukraine. Okay, Ukraine will give back, 500 kilometers of Kursk that they still control. In exchange, Russia's supposed to give up 500 kilometers of Zaporizhia or something like that. I can see Trump really liking this deal, but Putin doesn't want to do a deal like that, and this is a way to effectively quash that kind of deal. Also, it may be some reaction to the lack of intelligence that Ukraine had from about a week when Trump cut off the intelligence there. Russia was able to make a lot of gains in Kursk simply because Ukraine didn't have the same intelligence that they typically had to repel the Russian attack. So we have this talk of a 30-day ceasefire that's on the table. And I just want to go over this article I wrote on was it Wednesday for the Libertarian Institute. Zelensky, Kiev won't cede territory, wants strong U.S. response if Russia rejects the ceasefire. So President Zelensky explained his understanding of a ceasefire proposed by Ukrainian American officials this week, saying his country would not make any territorial concessions. Additionally, Kiev expects strong steps from President Donald Trump should Moscow reject the plan. Discussing the ceasefire proposal on Wednesday, Zelensky said, "We are fighting for our independence. Therefore, we will not recognize any occupied territories as Russia's. Our people have fought for this. Our heroes died. How many injured? How many passed? No one will forget about it. This is the most important red line. We will not let anyone forget about this crime against Ukraine." Zelensky's refusal to give up territory makes it unlikely the Kremlin will agree to a ceasefire, as Russian officials insist that 5 Ukrainian provinces annexed by Moscow will never be returned to Kiev. Additionally, Russia says it's seeking a permanent end to the conflict, not a short-term truce. Even if a ceasefire had multiple points that crossed Russia's red lines, Zelensky said he expects Trump to sanction Russia and send more arms to Ukraine. On Tuesday, he said, "I understand that we could count on strong steps. I don't know the details yet, but we're talking about sanctions and strengthening Ukraine." Trump has previously threatened severe sanctions and tariffs on Russia if Putin did not agree to a ceasefire. Zelensky repeated on Wednesday that he still expects Trump to take those steps if the proposal is rejected. If the Russians are not ready for a ceasefire, we do hope that the American side will demonstrate exactly what it said, Zelensky explained. The White House has led Western officials in saying that it is now Putin who needs to accept the peace plan. "It's now up to Russia," Trump said. "Our people are going to get Russia right now as we speak, and hopefully we can get a ceasefire from Russia." While Zelensky's reluctance to make key concessions suggests that Moscow will likely reject the proposal, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Putin will wait to hear the details from U.S. officials before responding. And so I thought Putin's response was quite brilliant here, because it seemed like the Western objective, the White House objective, what Trump, Waltz, Rubio put together was a ceasefire that wasn't necessarily going to be acceptable to Moscow, but they put it together, they sent it to Russia, and they were saying, oh, now the ball is in Russia's court, meaning that like Russia has to accept this. And so I think what Putin did here is found an effective way to effectively punt the ball back to the Americans and put it back in their hands. So Russian President Vladimir Putin has signaled that he's open to a ceasefire in Ukraine, but has questions about the 30-day U.S.-Ukrainian proposal that needs to be discussed. Putin said, "The idea itself is the right one. We definitely support it, but there are questions that need to be discussed, and I think we need to talk them through with our American colleague and partners." The Russian leader listed potential conditions for a 30-day ceasefire, including guarantee Ukraine wouldn't be supplied with more weapons. "We also want guarantees that during the 30-day ceasefire, Ukraine will not conduct mobilization, will not train soldiers, will not receive weapons," he said, according to RT. And to be honest, my guess is that these are all pretty heavy poison pills for Ukraine that would make them not take this ceasefire. Putin also questioned who would monitor the ceasefire, who will determine where and who has violated a ceasefire agreement along the 2,000-kilometer front line, who will attribute blame for any violations. These are all questions that require thorough examination on both sides, Putin said. The Russian leader said any long-term peace deal needs to find the root cause of the war. He made the comments as U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff arrived in Russia to discuss the proposal. Yuri Yushkov, a Kremlin official, said Witkoff would be holding closed-door meetings with Putin. The Russian official also said the U.S. and Ukrainian proposal would only give Ukraine a chance to regroup, and it would need to be adjusted to meet Moscow's interest. He explained, "As for the 30-day temporary ceasefire, what's it about? There's nothing in it for us. It will only provide Ukrainians with the opportunity to regroup and gain strength to continue doing what they are doing. These are hasty actions that do not benefit long-term settlement. Well, we will work on to think it over so that it reflects our position. Two, it reflects only Ukraine's stance at this point. Yershkov said that Russia wanted a long-term peace deal and that the official Russian position on the U.S.-Ukrainian proposal would be formulated by Putin. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov made similar comments opposing the idea of a temporary ceasefire, pointing to the Minsk Accords, which were first reached in 2014 for a truce in Ukraine's eastern Donbass region. Lavrov mentioned the Istanbul Agreement, referring to the peace deal that was on the table in March and April of 2022, which was discouraged by the U.S. and its allies. I am talking about the Minsk Accords, the deal that was discarded after the 2014 coup, and the Istanbul Agreement. All of these included ceasefire, and every time it turned out that they lied to us, the Ukrainians lied with the support of their European partners. A joint statement between the U.S. and Ukraine that was released after talks in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday said that Ukraine expressed readiness to accept the U.S. proposal to enact an immediate interim 30-day ceasefire, which can be expanded by mutual agreement of the parties, and which is subject to the acceptance and concurrent implementation by the Russian Federation. The statement also said the U.S. had resumed military aid and intelligence sharing for Ukraine, which was briefly paused. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that if Russia doesn't accept the 30-day ceasefire, the U.S. would then would know who is the impediment to peace, signaling he thinks the proxy war will continue as if a deal isn't reached. And I think that's probably what Rubio wants. I wonder if Trump understands the dynamic of what happened in Riyadh between Waltz, Rubio, and the Ukrainians, and how it seems like they kind of have flipped Trump's position, where now the president is going to be pressuring Moscow to engage in talks rather than Ukraine, even though Ukraine really hasn't moved their position at all. All right, next up here, European officials mold troop deployments to enforce Ukraine's ceasefire. So a bloc of Western countries held a security conference to discuss their role in enforcing a ceasefire in Ukraine. European leaders have debated troop deployments toward the war-torn nation and even considered strikes on Russian forces. French President Emmanuel Macron hosted a meeting in Paris with officials from 34 nations on Tuesday. The talks were centered on how they could provide Ukraine with enough military assistance to deter Russia from breaking a ceasefire agreement. American officials were not invited to the summit. While the meetings were held behind closed doors, Macron said it was time to move from concept to plan to define credible security for Ukraine. However, a Ukrainian official speaking with the AP said their proposals were still in their early stages. Diplomats are discussing, military officials are discussing, but we still don't have real proposals, the official said. The talks are not in the first stage. We did a lot in the first stage, but we still don't have a real solid approach. The European leaders reportedly discussed a direct troop deployment to Ukraine, somewhere away from the front lines, which would receive protection from Western air and naval power. Slovenia's Army Chief, Lieutenant General Robert Glavas, stated that his country was willing to contribute to the fort, but announced Slovenia's limited military capabilities. The question is, who's next? He told the AP. Who will go there? As we know, in Europe, many countries, especially small countries, don't have a lot of troops. Slovenia has about 7,000 active duty soldiers. French military officials said the plan would involve the creation of massive stockpiles of heavy weapons that could be rushed to Ukraine within hours or days. A Western official further explained that direct strikes could be launched on Russian forces if they violate the truce. While Washington was excluded from the event, the attendees acknowledged that any Western military presence in Ukraine would need American support. The idea is to what they call aggregate the capabilities of various European countries to offer security guarantees and ensure the peace deal is robust and verifiable, with the aim to get some U.S. backing, said another French official, explaining to get signals on U.S. backstop, the able and willing European countries must be able to aggregate their capabilities and demands. One Ukrainian official voiced hope that President Donald Trump would go along with the idea. I fully believe it's possible. Trump is comfortable with the idea is very positive for us, and if Europe wants to be a real player, they should do this. Any European proposal to send troops to Ukraine or strike Russian positions will almost certainly be rejected outright by Moscow. Russian officials have previously dismissed the idea of Western troops in Ukraine as a part of any agreement to end the war. The Paris summit was held as the White House continues its effort to broker a deal to end the war in Ukraine. Earlier this week, U.S. and Ukrainian officials announced a 30-day ceasefire plan. However, it remains unclear whether Russia will be receptive to the proposal. And it seems like what Zelensky is saying, what the European leaders are saying, are going to make the Russians less likely to accept the proposal, not more. All right, now this is absolutely horrific. I actually have two stories here. They're absolutely horrific. The second one is the worst one. This one, to start off with our coverage of the Middle East today. Doctors Without Borders condemns Israel's siege of Gaza. So after phase one of the hostage exchange and ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel expired, Tel Aviv refused to continue on to step two of the deal and demanded new negotiations. To pressure Hamas to agree to Israel's new demands, Tel Aviv has stopped all aid and power from entering the Strip. Doctors Without Borders, or Medical Sans Frontières, MSF, strongly condemns the Israeli-imposed siege on Gaza, which is depriving people of basic services and critical supplies, including access to water, by cutting electricity supplies, the international aid organization said in a statement issued on Tuesday. It continues, the Israeli authorities have instrumentalized humanitarian needs by using them as a bargaining chip, such as cutting electricity supplies to Gaza and preventing all aid from entering. This policy, which amounts to collective punishment, must be immediately stopped. MSF calls on Israeli authorities to respect international humanitarian law and uphold its responsibilities as an occupying power to end this inhumane blockade of Gaza. The statement comes as the ceasefire continues to break down and Israel refuses to allow the agreement to progress to the second phase. The first stage ended on March 1st, with Hamas holding up its commitment to release more than 30 Israeli hostages. However, Tel Aviv did not comply with its phase one commitments to the agreement, blocking aid from entering the Strip while IDF troops killed over 100 Palestinians in Gaza. Additionally, Israel refused to enter into talks on finalizing the details of phase two of the deal, instead demanding an extension of phase one. Tel Aviv, with Washington's backing, is demanding that Hamas release all the Israeli hostages without a permanent Israeli withdrawal or ceasefire in Gaza. The cutting of all food, medicine, and power is an effort to pressure Hamas to take the reworked deal. MSF also highlighted how Israel's allies are aiding in the collective deprivation of the Palestinian. Israel's allies have purposely ignored this grave violation of international humanitarian law and normalized this conduct. MSF also strongly urges Israel's allies, including the United States, to refrain from normalizing such actions and to act decisively to prevent Gaza from plunging into further devastation. Since President Donald Trump returned to office, the U.S. has approved $12 billion in arms sales to Israel. Tel Aviv has repeatedly used American-made weapons in attacks on civilian targets in Gaza, and many of the arms being sent to Israel are paid for by U.S. taxpayers. Under President Joe Biden, Washington provided Israel with $20 billion in military aid during the first year of the Israeli onslaught in Gaza. So next up here is this really, really horrific story that I wrote yesterday. UN finds Israel using sexual violence to dominate and destroy the Palestinian people. So a report published by the United Nations Human Rights Council found that Israel's security forces, or ISF, had engaged in systematic sexual and reproductive violence against Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. So Commission Chair Nalvi Pillay explained the evidence collected by the commission revealed a deplorable increase in sexual and gender-based violence. There is no escape from the conclusion that Israel has employed sexual and gender-based violence against Palestinians to terrorize them and perpetuate a system of oppression that undermines their right to self-determination. The report states the commission concludes that there has been a large increase in sexual and gender-based crimes perpetrated against Palestinians by members of the ISF since October 7th, 2023. It added that the ISF intends to retaliate and punish them collectively for the attacks carried out by the military wing of Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups in southern Israel on October 7th. The commission concluded that the abusive acts were so prevalent that they were now a de facto part of ISF's standard operating procedures towards Palestinians. So the UN body added, the commission concludes that these and other forms of sexualized torture, including rape and violence targeting genitals, are committed with either explicit orders or implicit encouragement by top civilian and military leadership. The authors of the report argue that the purpose of the sexual humiliation is to psychologically dominate the detainees. The way in which these often sexual acts are committed include their filming, photographing, and dissemination online, shows that forced public stripping and nudity, as well as sexualized torture and ill treatment, are a part of the persecutory attack against men and boys committed to punish, humiliate, and intimidate Palestinian men and boys into subjugation. It continues, the frequency, prevalence, and severity of the sexual and gender-based crimes perpetrated across the occupied Palestinian territories leads the commission to conclude that sexual and gender-based violence is increasingly used as a method of war by Israel to destabilize, dominate, oppress, and destroy the Palestinian people. Other UN reports have found that Israeli soldiers use sexual humiliation, beatings of genitals, and rape against their Palestinian captives. Most of the abuse goes unpunished, creating a culture of impunity. So Pillay, who headed the commission, said, the exculpatory statements and actions by Israeli leaders and the lack of effectiveness shown by the military justice system to prosecute cases and convict perpetrators sends a clear message to members of the ISF that they can continue committing such acts without fear of accountability. The UN report released on Wednesday explains that Israel has systematically shut down the maternity and reproductive centers in Gaza. Sexually and reproductive healthcare facilities have been systematically destroyed across Gaza, including maternity hospitals and maternity wards of hospitals, and Gaza's main in vitro fertility clinic. Israeli authorities deliberately destroyed such healthcare facilities, rendering them non-functional. So absolutely horrific. This was one of the worst things that Trump has said, and maybe one of the more actual anti-Semitic statements made by an American official. Chuck Schumer says Chuck Schumer is a Palestinian, not Jewish anymore. So President Trump on Wednesday called Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer a Palestinian while criticizing the Democrats for not supporting the GOP spending plan. Schumer is a Palestinian as far as I'm concerned. He's become a Palestinian. He used to be Jewish. He's not Jewish anymore. Trump began using Palestinian as an insult while on the campaign trail and even called Joe Biden a bad Palestinian during their debate. Trump first labeled Schumer a Palestinian while campaigning, apparently criticizing the Jewish senator for calling for an election in Israel. And look, this is in a way like the same thing as Joe Biden's "you ain't black if you got to think about voting for me or Trump." It's really weird that Trump is stripping away Schumer's Jewish identity and calling him a Palestinian as an insult. I mean, that's probably anti-Semitic and also, Islamophobic, just pretty awful thing to do. But on top of that, Schumer is very pro-Israel, and this whole idea that, he's on the side of the Palestinians is just completely absurd. Okay, so Iran has received the letter from Trump finally, and the Ayatollah again rejects talks with the U.S. in the face of pressure. I'm not surprised that Iran is still rejecting these talks. I guess it's interesting that the letter finally did arrive. Next up here, this one from Jason Ditz at antiwar.com. Secret side deal with U.S. gave Israel free hand to keep attacking Lebanon through the ceasefire. And so this is just basically that the Americans agreed to let Israel only, Hezbollah was going to continue with the ceasefire in southern Lebanon. If they started bombing Israel, of course, they would be in violation of the ceasefire, but Israel was allowed to violate the ceasefire repeatedly. And then, while this next one from Jason Ditz, Syria military operations over, but killing of Alawite civilians continues. So Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, declared their operations against Alawites over on Monday morning, but the execution of Alawite civilians has not halted. The number of civilians executed before Monday has also been rising further as more are counted. At least 17 Alawite civilians have been killed along the northwestern coast since Monday, with the largest confirmed incident reported Monday night in Jebla. A witness says that militia members aligned with the government entered the Alawite neighborhood, took men from their homes, and shot them in the streets. The witness said some of the militia members appear to be Chechen, which is in keeping with reports that HTS has absorbed a lot of foreign Sunni Islamists into their security forces and their associated militias. They have also been reported by locals as having been heavily involved in the massacre of Alawites from the beginning. At least 5 more civilians, possibly as many as 21, were executed in a village just south of Banias, and their bodies left on the highway outside of town. It may not be directly related to the ongoing purge of Alawites, but it's also reported that the former diplomat Nouraddin al-Labad and his brother were killed by gunmen in the southern town of al-Sanaya. These areas are far outside of the field of the mass executions. Labad was also an Alawite and loosely tied to the former Assad government, which is presumably why he was targeted. Yet he had defected from the Assad government way back in 2013 and had been since serving as a representative to the political council of Syrian rebels overseas. He had just returned to Syria from France 2 weeks prior to his death. Though the Tartarus and Latakia governances were spared the worst of the violence during the protracted Syrian civil war that left HTS in charge, the presence of a large number of Alawites, in the sense that they are Assad loyalists, has fueled resentment and made them the main target for the post-Assad killings. The massacre started on Thursday, that's last Thursday, after a group of Alawite militias attacked an HTS checkpoint, starting a major battle. In addition to the hundreds of people on both sides killed in the battle, a huge number of civilians were summarily executed, overwhelmingly Alawites and Tartarus and Latakia governances, but with some spillover into the neighboring Homs and Hama governances. The death toll from Thursday to Monday is still being counted, with the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights putting the present documented figure at 1,383 killed. The Gray Zone spoke to 8 agencies in the area who are told the death toll is much higher. They said over 4,000 civilians were killed, thousands more wounded, and about 200,000 people have been internally displaced by the violence. Over 10,000 Alawites had already reported fleeing into neighboring Lebanon as of Sunday, and more have continued to head into northern Lebanon, despite the difficulty of crossing in an area where there's no official border crossing anymore. Alawites make up a roughly 10% of Syria's population, meaning between 2 and 3 million people. Most of them live in the northwest. They were founded in the 9th century by Ibn Nasir, an offshoot from the Shiite tradition, and the perception of them as effectively Shiite also makes them a target of the Sunni Islamist groups. All right, and then last up here, Syria placed under Islamist rule for 5 years by new interim constitution. And so this is Anzalone just declaring Sharia law for Syria, which means I wouldn't be surprised if these reprisal killings or if these summary executions of civilians continue to happen. All right, everybody, that will do for the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in, supporting my work all week, and we will be back with more episodes of the Kyle Anzalone Show, conflicts of interest, articles, all next week as well. Thanks, everyone.